I would rather hurt parents' feelings, make them feel guilty, and then we have a discussion about what we can do about it. But if you try to protect parents from feeling badly, you're just shifting the bad feelings to the children instead of to the parents. Parents are grown-ups and they can deal with the bad feelings. The problem is children cannot.
Well, Erica Commissar, I can't tell you what a privilege it is for me to talk to you. My wife and I have read much of your work, and a particular book I'd like to talk to you about today is a book you've written called Being There. Now, we had published in the UK very recently a report around school readiness, which highlighted the fact that maybe 30% or more of children aren't ready for school. They can't use the toilet, they don't know how to play, they don't know how to listen or sit still. Above and beyond that, we know that more than half of kids are born outside of marriage, etc. these days. And your book, to me, seems to address a lot of the issues that we're talking about. So I wonder if we could start off, just say hi to us and tell us why you wrote that book and whether or not you think it's pertinent to the things I just mentioned.
Well, I'm a psychoanalyst. I'm also a social worker. I'm an author, and the founder of an organization called Detachment Circles, which brings community together around parenting. But the reason I wrote the book Being There 8 years ago was that about 30 years ago, longer than that, 34 years ago, I was starting my private practice and I was seeing an increase in mental illness in children that was really concerning to me, because younger and younger children and more children and adolescents were being diagnosed. It was the beginning of what I consider this wave. And it was well before social media. So, to answer the question of did social media cause this? No, it did not. It exacerbated what was already a wave, made the wave bigger. But the wave itself had to do with the way we raise our children. Because, what I was seeing in my practice is that the children who were doing the least well, the parents who were coming to me with children doing the least well, because I do something called parent guidance, were the children whose mothers, who were their primary attachment figures, were the least available to them. And the children who were doing the best were the ones who, even if they had imperfect mothers, had mothers physically and emotionally as present as possible. And so I started looking at the neuroscience research, the epigenetics research, the attachment research. And, I discovered this science, which was beginning at that in the 90s with the sort of the uptick in the neuroscience research. The neuroscience research was called the decade of the brain in the 90s. So it was a field called neuropsychobiology, which was the coming together of neuroscience, epigenetics, attachment theory, and psychoanalytic theory. And it made sense to me, the theories of emotional regulation, which are that if a baby isn't securely attached by the age of 3, then they develop all kinds of mental health issues because they never feel safe or secure, which lays down the foundation for regulation of emotions and the ability to cope with stress in the future. So, I saw this and I said, I have to tell people about it. So, and I didn't write the book 30 years ago because I was raising my own children. And I knew that what I was going to say in the book, I needed to live for my own children, which is if you're not physically and emotionally present enough, particularly in the first 3 years of a child's life, but throughout their childhood, you are not going to raise a child who's as resilient to stress or who can regulate their own emotions because they're more fragile. You may raise a child who seems like they can get along, but inside you haven't created the infrastructure, the structure for that child, the scaffolding, as John Bowlby would say, the scaffolding for that child to be able to cope with the stresses of life. And so that's why I wrote Being There, to say that more is more. The more you're physically and emotionally present for your children in the first 3 years, the greater the chance your children will have a foundation for mental health in the future. There are no guarantees. There are things that happen in life along the way, but your children are far better if you give them that foundation than if you don't.
Well, we live in the UK. It's very much the case that there's a push to get mums back into work. And you are talking about mums. We can touch on the subject of, well, isn't it just somebody who loves the child? Isn't that important? But you are talking about mums and attachment in the book. And there is a push to get mums back into work as soon as possible, to provide things like wraparound childcare. So mum or dad or not even gran drops off and picks up a child, but another organisation drops off and picks up a child, and then the parents, when they've finished work, maybe they'll go and collect them and put them to bed or something else like that. And you'd expect, if your theory were correct, you'd expect that society would end up being a production line of vulnerable kids who are not very well socially adjusted, who are very, very fragile and emotionally in trouble. And you look around and oops, that seems to be what we've got.
Right. We basically have deprioritized nurturing children in the early years, which has led to a lot of the fragility we see in young people today.
Cutting to the chase, what on earth are we supposed to do about it? I mean, we live in an economy where, in fairness, often you find two parents have got to work, primarily because mortgages are so expensive, other costs of living are so expensive. So in fact, it's not as it was perhaps in the past, where an average and let's just be honest about this, an average man's salary would enable mum to stay home and raise the children. It's kind of very difficult to do that these days. And this is aside from all the other objections, which is about, well, why should it be the mum, etc., etc. So how do we, and you know, we are, raising a generation of kids in difficulty. What do we do about it?
Well, so here's the problem as I see it, which is that there are many people, even in the attachment space, who will refuse to speak the truth because it makes women and men feel badly. And the reality is that children's needs don't change in an evolutionary way. Children's emotional needs don't change because society has shifted over a 75-year period. So whether or not it makes mothers and fathers feel badly, you still need to tell them what their children need and what the truth is. And if you're asking me how we manage that as a society, well, I mean, I go to the UK, I go to Washington, I go to Stockholm, I go to Hungary. I travel around the world trying to speak to governments about the importance of holding on to their paid leave policies as long as possible, giving mothers and fathers the option of raising their own children rather than having to delegate the care to institutions or to other caregivers, you know, because we have to the best of our ability, retain parents' choice to raise their own children. Having said that, whether or not it makes parents feel bad because of the economy, this is the inconvenient truth of what children need to be healthy. And so there are a lot of people who are not saying what they need to say in my field, which is very upsetting to me, because they're so afraid of hurting people's feelings. I would rather hurt parents' feelings, make them feel guilty, and then we have a discussion about what we can do about it. But if you try to protect parents from feeling badly, you're just shifting the bad feelings to the children instead of to the parents. Parents are grown-ups and they can deal with the bad feelings. The problem is children cannot.
Yeah. And I suppose governments can do an awful lot about these things. We've got a crazy emphasis on GDP everywhere. So actually, let's get mums out to work because it helps the GDP, instead of thinking, well, maybe there's something more valuable they can do for the economy, which is be there for a child, which reduces the likelihood of that child becoming involved in criminal activity later on, which enhances that child's ability to learn and grow up as a fruitful member of society, as opposed to what might happen if they suffer from detachment, etc., etc. And not only that, but we're happy to pay, and some estimates, up to £14,000 in the UK per child to be looked after by the state. but no way would we give that to a mum to stay at home, which may in fact make a significant difference between mums that are able to stay at home and mums that have to go out to work.
Well, I mean, again, I go to the UK to say exactly that, that if you took the monies that you put into institutional care and you gave it to families to spend, it's called family stipends, and you gave them a choice, there are always going to be mothers who don't get this or don't want to get this, or who say my children will be just fine. I mean, I think in the UK 66% of mothers, if given the option to stay home with their children in the early years, would take that option. That still means, if you think about it, that 33% wouldn't. That means 33% of mothers may have attachment disorders themselves, may find it very uncomfortable to be home with their children, may not enjoy their own children. I mean, so I always say it's instinctual. If you're not in my field and you're not in a field which is fascinated with babies, it's not what you do, maybe being fascinated with other people's children is not important to you. And I understand that. And that's actually instinctually correct to only be fascinated with your own children, right? But to not be fascinated with your own children enough to want to be with them in those early years generally means that there was some trauma in that parent's past. There was some loss or trauma or abuse or neglect that means that they cannot attach to their own children. And so those 33% of women, even if they were given the opportunity, would still choose to go out into the world. But 66% in the UK would choose to stay home. So that's a big number. And so what I do is I go to these governments and say, we have to keep the option for parents to have the choice to raise their own children. And the best way is to give them stipends, give that money to them and let them choose how they want to use that money. They either stay home with it, they use it to have a grandmother, to pay a grandmother to care for their child. Far better to have a kinship bond than to have a stranger care for your child. Far better to have one single stranger who becomes extended family than putting them in any kind of institutional or group daycare. So there are, you could say, sequentially, the best is for parents to care for their own children. And if they're not healthy, not well, not capable, then the next best is kinship bonds. And then after that, the next best is single surrogate care or a babysitter. And that money could be used to pay that babysitter.
The irony is that it's abhorrent to think of taking a puppy or a kitten away from its mother immediately and giving it to something else or someone else to look after. You'd say, no, it's got to stay with its parent. We know that. But with human beings, somehow that doesn't apply.
Right. That's exactly right. If you go to a breeder, any good breeder of a dog, because I have always had dogs, and any good breeder will tell you we cannot take that puppy away from its mother for close to 3 months. We won't do that until the baby is fully weaned, yet we put infants in daycare as early as 2 weeks of age in this country. You would never, the breeder would say that's going to make for a very crazy, neurotic, mentally ill dog. And our children have irreducible biological needs for safety and security. There's a lot of theories that say that babies are born 9 months too early. So we're basically going against everything biological in separating mothers and babies so early.
You mentioned Hungary. I was there a year ago last summer, and I got to speak to a number of young people, a number of employers, and they are doing some great work, but because of the way they're doing it, they're trying to give mums more time with children and trying to encourage mums to have more children. This is mums who are working.
Right.
But what employers were saying was, well, we can't afford to do what the government wants us to do. So the corollary is we find a reason not to employ childbearing age women. Which again, for those third who would work if they could, that gives a difficulty there. So it's almost like you're saying, well, this is something the government should do, for couples, married, whatever, who are having children, which again is what Hungary seems to be trying to do. But you've got to be very careful with the economic model, otherwise you disincentivize things that you don't necessarily want to disincentivize.
And this is a radical thing to say. I'm not sure that women should work in big institutions who want to have children. I think if you don't want to have children, then working in a big male dominated institution may be right for you. Being a banker, being a cog in the wheel of a corporate structure. Maybe that will work for you because you're gonna live your life in a more, should I say, sequential fashion, in a more linear fashion, like men do. You work your way up the ladder, and you don't stop till you're 60, whatever.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Women don't do well with that because if they want to raise healthy children, or if they want to have children, because some women don't want to have children, but for the ones who do, corporate structures don't work for them. What works better for women is to be in service fields or to start their own businesses, to be entrepreneurial. All service fields are entrepreneurial, whether you're a speech pathologist or a therapist or a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, or, even things like being a nurse practitioner or being a lawyer can be service oriented, meaning you can have your own thing going where you can control the hours and be more flexible so it works around your child. Because really what children need is they need you to work around their schedule, not that they work around your schedule.
You can hear jaws dropping onto the floor all around the place because it sounds radical, but it's just not. And you've written about this stuff before, even in the most egalitarian of countries, that they've done the most to equal out opportunities. Women, generally speaking, still choose more service type stuff and stuff working with people, and men are much more career minded and choose the kind of large corporate entities like you've said. And that there just seems to be, which you've written about fairly extensively and spoken about, just a difference on a population basis between men and women.
Well, there are ways of, if you love finance or you love law or you love medicine, there are ways of working in those fields entrepreneurially. But generally, you make less money. Generally, you give up the rat race. So for a doctor to have a small private practice, or a lawyer to have just a couple of clients that will work around her child's schedule, or for a financial advisor to say, I'm getting out of a big firm where, I was in the rat race and I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to have a few clients that I see in my own time. So there are ways for women to do it, but what they have to do is they have to sacrifice ego. And that's really hard for women and for men today, to sacrifice ego. There's a very sort of steep incline in narcissistic personalities and narcissistic disorders, sort of individualistic narcissistic disorders, which means that ego comes first rather than relationships. For relationships to be healthy, they have to come first, not ego.
Yep.
And so, it means giving up a title. I think there's a book now called Power Pause by a friend named Neha Rush, and she writes about how identity is so connected to your title. Identity is connected to money, it's connected to what you do, but more to your title. And so if you give up, partner in a law firm, and instead you are a lawyer who works on your own terms. I have a good friend who worked in a big New York law firm. And she, after 2 years, said, I want to have children, and this is a terrible life. This is a terrible life for men and women. We work too hard. We have no balance. And there's no way I can be present as a mother if I work in this big New York law firm 60 hours a week. So she left, and she had a couple of clients that went with her, and she started a trust and estate law firm. And she worked on her own terms. She had a couple of wealthy clients, and she did it on her own terms. Maybe she had a few at a time, but she didn't work more than 20 hours a week. And she could control when she did that work. So there are ways of doing it, but the whole idea that corporate structures are terrible for women wanting to raise children, because it means basically you're working for the man. And when you're a mother, you can't work for the man. You got to work for yourself, Or, and I would say work for the woman, but some women are as bad as working for the man today because they're so intensely trying to compete with men that they're more men than men are. So, but the idea is flexibility and control, and working very part-time when you have young children still allows you to work. But it doesn't involve corporate structure, right? So the corporate structure doesn't work for women.
I was talking to Nancy Pearcey. She's written extensively about this as well. And she reflected on the fact that, of course, before the Industrial Revolution, that's just how things worked because men and women would be in the house together. And basically working for the same company, as it were. But, the woman would be doing what she could do around the children and the man would be off doing what he could do, which was, often quite different. But the home was the priority. The relationship was the priority. And that's a massive, truthful statement you made, that really for a relationship to work, it's got to not be about individuals, but about the relationship. And a lot of us have forgotten that these days. Can I just your book is wonderful and it's full of receipts. It's not just your opinion. You go through it systematically, methodically, and you show the devastating effects of detachment when kids are abandoned at a very early age. I know some people, just can't get out of doing that and they're going to feel bad. And you've said, well, yeah, but we're speaking on a population basis and a policy basis, and we shouldn't be promoting that if we can avoid it. But the book I would recommend people read it. It's a lengthy book because you go into the detail and you justify everything that you're saying extensively. But is there, for people who sadly don't read, and there's a lot of them, including, dare I say, many of our policymakers, is there anything or anywhere people can go to kind of get the gist of things a bit better?
Well, you can listen to my book on audiobook. So, if you're someone who really doesn't read, you could also listen to podcasts. I mean, I've done a million podcast interviews. Listen to the podcast, put your earphones in and listen to the podcast. I mean, you're not going to get the detail or the research unless you read it. But maybe, if that's the way you absorb information.
I think it's one of the most important messages for our time. I really, really do. And that's why it's such a joy to talk to you. And I couldn't believe reading it. I don't want to reveal too much, but in terms of our own family and our experience of working in schools and that sort of stuff, reading that book was just a massive aha moment because it kind of explains everything that's going on around us and in society and in the schools and that sort of stuff. It makes perfect sense. I would recommend people read it, digest it if they can, in whatever form they can. If not, go and listen to a podcast. The other thing I would say about the book is it's quite good because although it's a long book, and it has to be, the chapters are short. And, each chapter deals with a different specific topic, and it's really good just to dip into from that perspective. So please, if you're listening, go and buy this book. It's well worth a read. But I wonder, before we finish, Erica, what else are you working on? What else should we read that you're doing right now?
So my second book, so there are two critical periods of brain development. One is 0 to 3 and the other is 9 to 25. And what we know is that 0 to 3 is what we call the state of neurogenesis, where the brain cells are growing. The right brain is growing. 85% of the right brain is developed by the age of 3. But between 9 to 25, it's a pruning period. So it's another very vulnerable period where the environment has a great impact. So meaning you as parents have a great impact on your child's future mental health and emotional development. So the second book, which is called Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents. That's a book to read if you have older children or you missed the first window and you say, what do I do to repair what I may have missed? So you can repair it. And so the second book is about adolescence, but the third book that's coming out next February is called A Parent's Guide to Divorce. Most parents, because they're suffering so much, cannot help but share their suffering with their children. So this is a book about how you can raise healthy children through a divorce process, but it requires that you're very self-aware and that you not impose your pain on your children. Parents are so fixed on splitting the baby, like King Solomon, like splitting the muffin. I'll take the top of the muffin, you take the bottom of the muffin, that they don't realize what harm they're doing to their babies by not respecting attachment security. If you rip that baby away while they're breastfeeding or while they're securely attaching, you are going to cause irreparable damage to that baby in the future. And that's not something we say.
I'm so grateful for your time. I know you're really busy. Perhaps after February, I'll read your book as soon as it comes out. You'll come back and talk to us about it.
Thank you. I would love to.
That's brilliant. Well, Erica Komisar, it's a genuine privilege to meet you and to talk to you and to share about your work with our many, many supporters. And I do hope it leads to many more book sales. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for interviewing me.